more services. And I certainly don't want to do that to staff.
Really quick, in my understanding, we would just be coming back with the language to define how that would look.
Works and Gang
Adopt
Reduction Committee.
the affordable housing
by council members
work
Vizcaino,
plan,
Rodriguez, and Roop.
strategic, what are we
And
calling it?
Strategic plan.
we have a number of
Strategic
items
plan.
today. Mr. Espinosa,
as
are there any
amended.
general public comment cards? I have
Could
one
I,
here.
before we get into
Yes,
the
Mr.
vote,
Okay, just
I
the
know
one
that we
have here,
moved
correct?
through each fairly quick,
yes.
Okay.
but I want to
Great. So why
ensure
don't we,
that
we'll
Sheldon, what
start
you took
by
down
having
in terms
the
of what
multiple comment cards,
Madam President
along
indicated,
with the
and then
general public
Madam
comment
President, the
card,
notes that you took
which is
on the
Mr.
methodologies and the goals are aligned and in sync
Here
before
you
we
can,
actually approve it.
Speak on.
So
you signed
my
up for multiple
recommendation would
items
be if we can
as well as
provide the
general public
feedback
comment.
to Sheldon so that he can compile
Chair, will that
and
be for 3
update this
minutes?
document and get it
2
back to
minutes
us
on
for
the
review
items
prior
and
to the
1
next
minute of
commission
general public
meeting.
comment.
And maybe one of the first things on the agenda item could be that we actually approve the strategic work plan after all of us have had an opportunity to review, provide feedback, and then move for approval.
Where's the silver tongue
Commissioner
top
Lopez,
one?
just to let you know, these are recorded.
Well, it's
so
apparent
we will
that
have the audio of everything that
our
was said.
failure
if that works
to
for you, but if
adhere
you,
to the
just so you know, I
advice
just wanted to let you know.
Oh,
of
thank
the
you. I just
Rouge
want to make sure
Pact
that the
is
language
that
in writing
our
that's going to be added onto
infrastructure
this matches up to what you took down and then what.
is in great
Could we do
need.
Yeah, because I was hoping we could approve
We
it
lack
today.
infrastructure
and then
because we have a
maybe with
criminal
authorization
element
to then
in our
clean up any
administration of
items
elected
in writing.
officials.
So is there a
post-approval.
contingency
Such as
approval that
Herman
we're able to
Jason
do? Like we
Wesson
approve the current work plan with
/
amendments
AKA
upon contingent
Herbie
subject to
of
subject to
final
CD10,
review and approval?
who's allowed
final review
our
of language.
monies
Final review
to
of
be
language.
paid out to LLCs outside of the jurisdiction of
Okay,
Mike
so we have a
Fuhr,
motion and a
where this
second
money
to
could
approve
be
the plan.
related to
Let's
street-related
do a quick roll call.
infrastructure, such as our sidewalks and streets,
Okay, so
Willits versus Los
I
Angeles.
know we don't have to, but I like to.
And then we go into the
the
metro.
language for that is.
How the city of Los Angeles Metro
So
Transportation
we have a motion to
has
approve the
discriminated
strategic plan
against the
as
majority
amended,
of disabled
subject
people and their
to
families
final review
under Willits
of
versus
language.
Los
That's
Angeles.
the motion.
And as the attorney Jordan knows,
I don't
Barden
wanna
versus
eliminate approval because I
Sacramento.
don't want to have to reapprove it.
So,
Right, so,
subject
And
to
as
final
long as we
review
have
language,
right.
such bureaucracy of bullshit,
and now we'll
Leaves
have
it
we
open to
cannot
amend. If it's something
satisfy
egregious, then we can say, oh, no,
our
we have to open this up
transportation
again.
needs.
Got it. Yeah.
so now
as
we'll
you
have
heard,
Commissioner roll call
an
on that.
additional $2 to
On
$3
that
billion
agenda,
dollars for a fucked up
Commissioner,
fast train
Claros?
from Sacramento
Commissioner
to Washington
Epps,
to LA.
Commissioner Iwasaki,
I really
Commissioner
can't
Lopez?
believe
Yes.
that.
Commissioner Sotelo,
Yes.
And then we go to
Commissioner
item
Foundation?
6,
Yes.
although I
And
signed up on
Commissioner
every
Burke.
item except for item 3.
all in favor.
So that motion,
I'm not
that
screaming,
motion
fool. Sit down.
passes unanimously.
CD4.
We now have a work plan. We will have
Griffith
the
Park.
language
This is my
circulated
general
before our
public
next
comment.
commission meeting, and
15004,
and all feedback goes
Oxnard
back
Street,
to us.
Van
and
Nuys,
Sheldon.
California.
So that is item C, D,
Why has
and
Nuri
E,
and
all
CD6
approved.
allowed
And
the
item
Inland
number F is
Restaurant,
tabled at this
DBA,
moment.
aka
And,
Spearmint
do we have
Rhino,
any- we have one
to
more
gauge
public
in
comment card,
inappropriate
a
sex
non-specific
with
item.
its
It's a
clients
question
who
from
are
Ms.
there
Jordan.
to have a nice meal, in
And
addition
the
to
question
get a
is why
big
none
bonus.
of the meetings, I was wondering why none of these
What am I
meetings are
referring
held
to?
in downtown
All
Los
those
Angeles
fucking
and Skid
lap
Row,
dances the
since
clients
highest homeless
get on the
population
seats
is on Skid Row.
at the Spearmint Rhino,
Thank you very much,
DBA,
Ms. Jordan.
Inland Restaurant.
Okay,
And
with
that's
that,
why
can I get
today
a motion
they
to adjourn?
canceled the police panel commission.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So not to hear the complaint and the
Yes,
concern that we have a
Commissioner
fat
Claros
bitch
and,
running
I
Van
have
Nuys
met
to the
with
ground.
LADWP Commissioner, Ara
That closes
Vesquez, and she mentioned of
public
a
comment.
community solar program that's
general public comment, is that
available
correct?
for affordable housing.
well.
Okay.
I
multiple,
was
but it
wondering
also
if we could
closes
go
all
ahead and
general public.
request
So
a
general public
presentation
comment
to
now
learn a
is
little bit more about
closed.
that program.
Okay.
Is that possible?
Okay, so whenever we ask
So now we
for
move,
agenda items, what I'd like to
unless
do
there
is
is
do
an
it in the
objection, what
context
I'd like to
of
do
our
is move
strategic
items
plan.
4,
So would you
5,
consider
and
that a
6
policy,
on consent.
preservation, or production item?
It would be a preservation.
Seeing
a
it's been moved and
preservation.
seconded, no
Yes.
objections.
Okay, because it's on
So
existing
items 4, 5,
housing.
and 6 are
Correct.
moved on unanimous
Correct.
consent,
Okay.
and that will bring us.
How about
we're gonna
production?
Take item
Because
1,
it's about
and then item
making,
3, and then we'll
think
move
it
to
should
item
be
2, which will be our
under that
larger item.
methodology.
So,
Well,
if you
the
could-
topic of solar panels
item
and
1 is
affordable
correct.
solar panels
number 1
for
is
affordable
communication for the
housing
mayor relative
would
to the
be
appointment of Ms.
around the
Norma
constructability of affordable housing,
Isahakian
and
as
that
the
could be under
permanent
production.
Executive Director of the Bureau of Street
Sounds good
Lighting.
enough.
Okay. So it's a
Ms.
stretch,
Hawkins, if
but
you
see,
could
that's
please
how I want you
join
guys
us.
to think
We are
about it.
thrilled that you're
You know,
here.
every
You have
time we look at a topic,
29 years
again, I
of
want
service
us to
the
be
city and,
specific
12
and,
years as
and deliverables on this stuff.
incredibly well
So
So
Madam,
look at a
Madam
topic.
President, if I
qualified for
may, we
this
have 5
position,
items
and,
that go onto
Please
our
tell us
next
a little bit
agenda.
about
Correct? And I just like to
why
go
you
over
want to
those
do it,
really quick.
and
That's okay?
Sure.
We've had a
Okay,
great
so
working relationship. So
the
I
ad
look
hoc
forward to
report
hearing.
back.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, definitely.
the,
So good afternoon, committee chair and
community
members, and
engagement
I wanted to first of all
opportunity.
thank you for your consideration as for me as
not
the
sure
director of the Bureau of Street
why I
Lighting. I
have
wanted to cover a
That-
little bit about
that's
my
right, that's-
background
Okay, community
and my
engagement
vision for the
opportunities,
Bureau as
a
we go
calendar of
forward.
events.
As you mentioned, I have
Item
29
F,
years of city
'cause we'll have a
service.
report back on the
Most
budget.
of those are with the Bureau of
And
Street
then,
Lighting. The
last
last
but
12
not
years I
least,
have been the
under
assistant director
production,
overseeing all of
we're
the
gonna invite
divisions,
someone
including
from the
engineering, admin, and
DWP
field
to
operations
present
division.
on their,
And
community solar
as
program.
the assistant director, I have managed many of the large
Yes.
programs
So
that we've
what
delivered.
we'll do is I'll
including our
work with
LED and
you
high
on this
voltage
because the
program,
other item
our
is going to
co-location
be,
program of
you know,
communication carriers,
so
and
I
our
want-
EV,
so there are
charging
standing
program. Now,
items on
city
the
has
agenda, and the
second
standing
largest street
items
lighting system
have
in the
to
nation with
include,
over
again, the
220,000
language
streetlights.
around,
And as director, I will continue our efforts
you know,
to
city
improve our
attorney just
service,
giving you language
providing lighting
about
to the residents and visitors
the
of
ad
the
hoc
city.
committee to
And I
make
have
sure
3
that if
areas of
there are
focus that I
any
would like to
items
discuss.
that we need to vote on,
Public safety,
we have the ability to
connectivity,
have that as
and
part of the
communities.
standing item.
In public
Right.
safety, I will be
And then the
reassessing
other
our
standing
resources
item
to ensure that
is,
we focus on keeping the lights on. And with that, I will
items-
take a new approach and
Items
towards
within
a
the
common
purview
problem that we all
of
have,
the
which is
commission,
top enviro
but
and
not
power theft.
on the agenda.
Now I will be
And
refocusing
then
our efforts
future
on
agenda
outreach,
items so that we can actually have
prevention
a
and
place in the
enforcement.
agenda to talk about
I will be
future
reaching out
agenda
to all the
items.
council districts to
So
initiate
we'll work on
a
maybe
new
the three of us
community
have a
awareness
conference call
program,
about it.
and I would like to coordinate with LEPD and city attorney's office to
And
increase our
actually want a
enforcement program.
topic
And
that's a little
in
bit
this
more
way, I'll
substantive for our
we will
next
be
meeting.
partnering with the
So,
communities to
whether
increase
that's
our
under
eyes and
preservation
ears in
policy
the
or
field.
production, we'll
This
figure
is
that
something
out.
that we have to
Okay?
continue. We have
So
to
thank you very much,
increase our
commissioners.
efforts on it
Great
because
work.
it's
Thanks
costing
for
us a lot of
participating,
money
and it was like
resources
2
in the
hours,
city.
so good job.
Second, connectivity. Now, the Bureau has been working diligently to make sure that the street lighting system is ready for smart city initiatives in the future. Street lighting is in 2/3 of the city and is a great asset. It has an existing electrical infrastructure and a perfect height for connectivity. And I will continue with the programs that we have been putting in place to ensure that we are ready for the smart city future. These programs include our remote monitoring devices that have been put at the top of our poles. This tells us if our streetlights are operating, the electrical usage, and this is our first step in connecting us to our infrastructure. Our LED and high voltage program, which has allowed us to connect additional attachments to our poles, and our EV charging station program, which again helps to promote electrical vehicles in the city. Our co-location program that allows us to attach communication devices to our poles, increasing the connectivity for the city's residents and visitors. And finally, we are looking into the world of sensors. We are conducting pilot projects to make sure that our system is ready to evolve to the next level in the smart city future. And finally, on communities, the city of LA is a great city, a very large city with a lot of smaller communities. Street lighting not only provides safety for residents, but a means of identity for the communities. We present an aesthetic presence on our streets. Now, my vision is to make sure that we have stronger lines of communication with our communities. I will be signing dedicated staff to all the council districts to ensure that they have opened those lines of communication. We want to ensure that the communities know what we have to offer, and we want to know what they need so that we can know what to strive for. So again, I wanted to thank you for this opportunity and your confidence in my leadership skills as a director for the Bureau of Street Lighting.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herman, please, no distractions. We're hearing your voice when we shouldn't be. Ms. Rodriguez, you had a question?
No, just a comment. I have to say that this nomination couldn't be any better placed for any one individual who is more prepared to take on this role. I've had the tremendous privilege of working alongside Norma when I was on the Board of Public Works, and there is just no one who, following in the footsteps of Ed Ibrahimian, you definitely are well prepared and well versed in making sure that we navigate the city's bureaucracy effectively to help prioritize constituents' needs and are, being responsive to our residents. And I look forward to seeing you take this new role on with a. I'm just very excited about your leadership and for the opportunity to continue to work with you in this role, so that we can help make sure that we address a lot of these issues that many of which we started on the Board of Public Works, primarily dealing with copper wire theft and helping to cut, hopefully save a lot of money in employees' time and city resources that are expended to help restore service. So thank you so much for your years of service, and I look forward to your continued work
Thank
with
you.
us.
Chairman, please. A lot of times when there's a change in leadership at the top, there's a lot of uncertainty and questions, and we all are wondering how things are going to go. What's really nice is that we all know you. We know you've got the helm, and we're all going to sleep soundly tonight as far as that's concerned. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Unless there are any further questions, comments, without objection, we will move your nomination forward. Congratulations from this committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We're moving now to, we're going to go to item number 3, actually, to move that next. Ms. Rodriguez, I know this is an item, you may want to say a few words to get us started on this item, and we do have public comment cards on this item, but I know you wanted to set the stage, so please go ahead.
I always forget about these mics. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my district, we have quite a significant amount of history that it seems in this day and age is particularly apropos that we make an extra concerted effort to bringing to light some of the incredibly divisive history that we've had, particularly as it relates to Tuna Canyon and the encampments, the internment camps that were located there. And remembering that history so that we never repeat it is something that I think has been a full-fledged effort by some really well-respected members of our community in the 7th District from the Sunland Tehanga community. And I'd actually I want to thank them for their continued efforts in the preservation of this important history, but for working with me in my office to help make sure that we commemorate and recognize this site appropriately. And so with that, I'd like to invite their public comment cards to
Great.
be.
So we have 5 public comment cards. We're going to start with 2 minutes each. Start with Hans Eberhardt. I apologize if I read the name. Followed by James Okazaki. So, Hans, Mr.
My name is James Okazaki, but we have a sort of a plan. We want to go first, so there's about 5 people that's going to speak.
Let me just, if the 5 people are Mr. Okazaki, Nancy Oda, Lloyd Height, and Hans Eberhardt, are those the names?
Yes, Lloyd's going to start.
Those are the cards, and you may choose the order of those folks that you like. Go ahead and just introduce yourself to start.
Good morning. My name is Lloyd Hitt, or I should say good afternoon. I'm chairman of the Tuna Canyon Coalition and preservation of this site. Site number 1039 as nominated by our council. I'm deeply honored to be here and speaking on behalf of the street signs for historic monument number 1039. It's been a long journey, over 10 years, when my search for the truth began as a historian and preservationist. Your action today will promote and remind passersby what happened and where. It will generate a memorial park as expected by the LA City Council and remind us to carry forward with what the City Council voted unanimously to create, Historic Monument Site 1039, park as an ancient grove of oaks that bore witness to the Japanese, Germans, and Italians held in the INS camp during World War II. And as a permanent reminder when fear and racism overrode human rights. The sketch of the 1 acre park I've passed out, it's on those 2 pages in front of you, is a rough sketch that was actually presented to us at our 3rd meeting, our working committee for the City of Los Angeles. And Yannick Dorbala is the architect for Snowball West, the developer. And he gave us a sketch of the park. It was right behind the clubhouse in the Grove of Oaks with a parking lot and access. And since then, he kind of denies it. This was presented to the coalition, Ken Bernstein, City Planning, and Councilman Fuentes, showing the ancient grove of oaks with a parking lot in Latuna Canyon Road. This was never withdrawn by Snowball West, and there is no expiration date. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker of the group.
Good afternoon. My name is Hans Eberhardt. I'm with the German American community here in Los Angeles for about 69 years. And that was at the time of Sam Yorty, when I was appointed to the Sister City and Foreign Visitors Committee. And I have been active in coordinating between ethnic groups that were foreign-born Americans and Native Americans. And in all this time, I've never heard of Tuna Canyon Detention Center. So we appreciate very much to put up a sign for future generations that they will know what history has happened in that area 14 miles from downtown Los Angeles. And I want to thank the City Council and this committee for their efforts in promoting history for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Public Works Committee members. My name is James Okazaki. I'm with the Little Tokyo Community Council, just down the street in Little Tokyo. I spent 34 years with the city. I'm an engineer, but being at the Tuna Canyon Detention Station site, which was a home for 2,500 Japanese, Peruvians, the Italians and Germans during World War II. It was open for about 2 years. It used to be a civilian Conservation Corps facility, and day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, it got converted to a Department of Justice detention station. It's one of 3 temporary detention stations that was located in Los Angeles, in the city of Los Angeles. As long as I've been in the city of LA since I was 10 years old, I never heard about a facility in Los Angeles. So I became very involved and interested in this movement of trying to create a historical monument. And back in 2013, the City Council, as you heard, unanimously approved this historical monument site 1039. When you go out there, and I did that this morning as well, it's the old Verdugo Golf Course site. Beautiful site. Mature groves of oak trees and sycamores. But you get the sense of tragic event that happened in the past. And so the City Council recognized that. Originally, the City Planning Preservation Committee denied it because there was no buildings left. These buildings were built by the Army Corps of Engineers back in 1933, but when they built the golf course in 1960, they demolished it. But the oak trees are still there. These trees were there before and after the...
You just finish your thought.
Okay, thank you. And the trees saw and they witnessed what happened there. They heard. They saw families come here, 10 feet away from the 12-foot barbed wire fence. They saw the tragedy that occurred there. And therefore, it's really important for us to honor that memory and history and legacy by locating a memorial site. And that was part of our vision and goal. And this street memorial sign will help people identify the location. It's at the corner of Tujunga Canyon, Tuna Canyon, and Honolulu. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Herman, no more outbursts like that, please. If you do one more, you're out. Clapping while he's speaking is inappropriate.
Good afternoon. My name is Nancy Oda, and I am an Angelino for 72 of my 72 years. So I'm a very proud citizen of this city. And I'm very honored to be here today as the president of the Tuna Canyon Detention Station Coalition. On December 16, 1941, people were arrested that night by the FBI. And there were 2,500 Japanese, German, and Italian immigrants, and Japanese taken from Peru and others, who were taken to Tuna Canyon after, in some cases, being processed in jails like in San Pedro. There is a diary made by Sasabune Sasaki who talks about busloads coming up to the facility and men stepping off. It's a camp that was designed to take the leaders of our community, people who were journalists, people who were Buddhist or Shinto priests, who were people who taught the martial arts or Japanese language, and others. And so many of them actually stayed in camps like this as late as 1947. So what we're trying to do is to talk about how important that this sign would be, because the board of the Tuna Canyon Detention Station and I are here to request that as soon as possible. As you heard, there was a working group, and we would like to assume that it was a sincere agreement between us and the landowners. So we look forward to the new sign. I see I'm running out of time. I want to thank everyone here today, and we are doing this for the descendants and all the supporters. And we feel very strongly that this will be an important addition. This is not only history for Americans, but ultimately it's world history. So thank you for your time and attention. I have some brochures here. One is to tell you about Tuna Canyon, and one is to tell you about our traveling exhibit. I'm out of time, but basically we have been on tour for a year and have been to 9 locations. So we hope you'll come and see the exhibit. And the brochure I just gave you is from our recent fundraiser, and we're very proud that Congressman Adam Schiff was our honorary chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you. That covers all the speakers. We're not missing anybody at this point from the group. This is proud that we're moving this forward. Those who do not remember history are bound to repeat it, as George Santana said. That's especially true in the world that we live in, and I applaud Councilwoman Rodriguez for bringing this motion forward. Drew, comment, question? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just really want to thank James and Nancy and the rest of the folks who came to testify today. And I really want to thank the leadership of Councilmember Monica Rodriguez for allowing me to participate and co-authoring this motion for the historical monument sign. We weren't here in 2013 when the City of LA and the City Council designated this historical cultural monument designation, but the fact that I was here to co-author the naming of the sign, or allowing the sign to go up. As an Asian American, as a minority, it is an honor and a privilege to, as our chairman said, help remember the past. Because history often, unfortunately, tends to repeat itself. And the one way to prevent that from travesties from repeating itself is by remembering. And that's why it's so important to remember what happened to the Japanese Americans with the internment camps, because this is something that hopefully we will make sure it never happens again. And part of that is by remembering our history. So I really want to applaud the community for stepping forward, and I really want to thank the leadership of Councilman Rodriguez and being able to participate. Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions on this item? Seeing no objection, we will unanimously approve the item. Congratulations, good work. Congratulations, everybody. We'll now move to item number 2. Mr. Espinosa, if you would read that item into the record.
Item number 2 is continued from December 6, 2017, and this is a report from the City Administrative Officer relative to the 2017 Fuse Fallow Evaluation of the State of street-related infrastructure, and this has also been related to the Transportation Committee.
And we have no public comment cards on this item, is that correct?
No, Mr. Chair.
Great. I'd like to invite Patty Huber, the Assistant CAO, to the podium. And while she's coming up, I just want to say a few things. We have a report with some major recommendations before us today. We were going to hear it last month, but because of the fires, we wanted to make sure we had the wisdom of Councilwoman Rodriguez, who was on the Public Works Board. Here, we postponed it until today, but there's a lot of information to digest in this report. I'm going to ask us to limit our discussion to the recommendations in Tier 1 only. We will hear the Tier 2 and Tier 3 recommendations at a later date. I mean, obviously, we can touch on them, but let's keep our focus on the big picture Tier 1. I also would like to mention, personally, I'm agnostic about one department's value over another. I think they're all great. The goal for us is to conduct our business around our streets in a more coordinated manner. If that means the Tier 1 recommendations of bringing DOT into Public Works, then that's something we're going to explore. If that means creating an Office of Infrastructure Management, we will explore that. I know I have constituents who complain when a street is repaved but isn't restriped. We all have that situation. When we build a bridge, should it be including a bike path? All of these kinds of things. My hope is that the recommendations will be seen, ultimately as a two-way relationship. I don't want the Department of Transportation to be nervous, certainly, or anyone who works there. They should know that their policy goals will be part of the discussion, certainly, and as we move forward, that's what this is about. I see our Department of Public Works Bureau working well together. I want to see the same reciprocal relationship between them and DOT. That means ultimately the goal is more grant opportunities for the city and opportunities. Again, as far as I'm concerned, it's not a consolidation in any way of DOT. As I understand it, we're looking at, and you're going to tell us about it, a potential transformative step in putting our streets and sidewalks into better coordination. So when we hear the report, I want to make sure we address all the concerns. Discussing this kind of change is never easy, but going into this Tier 1 is going to help us do a deeper dive into what it means, and then we'll do Tier 2 and 3 in the future. So Ms. Huber, if you could provide us an overview of the report and get us started. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Patty Huber. I'm the Executive Officer for the CAO, and it was probably about this time 2 years ago that the then CAO, asked the question on, are we really organized and structured in the most coherent fashion to ensure really coordinated and thoughtful delivery of infrastructure within the city, primarily within our Public Works Department. So we elected to partner with Fuse Corps, which is an organization that brings professionals primarily from the private sector to come in and do a deep evaluation of a government issue. So they partner with governments to bring in these executives. Many of them have 15 or more years of experience working in the private sector. Some of them may also will have some experience in the public sector, which in fact our Fuse Fellow had both. They do a whole recruitment process because we define a scope of work. They do a whole recruitment process. We interview 3 or 4 candidates of people who are interested in our project, and then we select someone. Over the past, it's an intense year-long process for this Fuse Fellow, and we brought in Laila Al-Quresh to come in and look at our basically project delivery efforts in the city. The report in front of you is the culmination of a very intense year-long process by Ms. Al-Quresh. She did a lot of interviews across departments, including all the bureaus of public works, DOT, interviewed people in our office, interviewed council members and council deputies, mayor's office, also interviewed stakeholders like MTA and our other external stakeholders, including neighborhood council alliances, to get sort of all their feedback on how do they see the city performing in this area. As noted, the report identifies 3 tiers of recommendations. The tiers are more based on the scale of the recommendation, not the priority of the recommendation per se. The 2 key recommendations are in Tier 1. They represent some significant structural change for the city of Los Angeles. We see that those changes, which involve reorganizing and putting all of our infrastructure departments into one governance structure, could help get us to a more coordinated and cohesive planning and delivery process. It also includes the establishment of an infrastructure department or group, not department, group within the Board of Public Works to, again, provide some of that information to the board for planning purposes as projects are done. The structural changes are of a nature that we did note in our report. Those are things that are truly best sort of dealt with through the annual budget process. They are not things that are easily done with all of the sort of administrative things that go on with a functional transfer on a mid-year basis. So to a certain degree, if this is something you had an interest in seeing in the upcoming budget, then you probably should be making a policy decision here in the next month or so that the mayor's office would have that input as they're developing the proposed budget, which then would be in front of you later. So also for your consideration as you're considering the mayor's proposed budget as to what it does or doesn't have in relation to this. We do look forward to working with you and the rest of the Transportation Committee and the full council as you deliberate on the recommendations in this report, both Tier 1 and all of the other recommendations in Tier 2 and 3. I would at this time like to introduce Lila to you. She will be walking you through the report. To the extent that you have questions that maybe are outside of her purview, since she's not schooled in the city, she's an outside consultant who doesn't know all of the city's processes and procedures for a lot of things. I will be here to answer some of those questions as they come up.
Great. Thank you. And welcome, Ms. Alcaraz. I know you have a lengthy presentation, so I'm going to say to my colleagues, we'll try to do most of our questions at the end of the presentation so that she can get through it. If there's something of a very clarification type of question, feel free to look at me. We can ask her on the spot, but as much as it's possible, I'd like to let her get through the presentation before we pepper her with tons of questions. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Ms. Alcaraz, and thank you for being here, and thank you for putting in the time to try to make our city more efficient.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Testing. Better? Okay. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Blumenfield, Vice Chair Buscaino, Councilwoman Martinez, Councilman Rodriguez, and Councilman Rue. I'm honored to be before you today to present the findings from a year-long investigation on the city's infrastructure programs. I'd like to begin by thanking your respective offices for being a part of the process, as well as the rest of the council offices not present today. I'd also like to formally acknowledge the executive advisory team for this project, which included representatives from CD3 and CD15 in their roles as the respective chair and former chair of this committee, CD6 as chair of the Energy, Climate Change, Environmental Justice Committee, CD11 as chair of the Transportation Committee, as well as the Mayor's Office and the Board of Public Works. This was not a small undertaking. This report is a result of a very thorough investigative process that entailed meeting many of our great employees and leaders within the city, as well as our external partners. The recommendations put forth by this report are designed to make long-term improvements independent of factors that change as administrations change. Our city's infrastructure systems, both softscape like crosswalks and hardscape like the streets, are in great use and great stress. Our city's population is expected to increase fourfold by 2050 to 16 million people, according to a paper from the Global Cities Institute. Another report estimates population growth to 13 million in LA County from the California Department of Finance. As a Reuters article noted, California's population boom will put increased strains on already overstretched public works and natural resources. Together, transportation and street-related infrastructure programs support key quality-of-life programs for Angelenos. These visible programs include multimodal transportation built on the city's streets and sidewalks on the public right-of-way. The Bureau of Economic Analysis shows that nationally, streets and highways are the oldest of common public infrastructures, far older than water, power, sewer, or transportation systems. Quote, streets and highways create a network for moving goods and services efficiently, enabling commerce and improving mobility. In Los Angeles, the separation between planning and execution for transportation infrastructure and planning and execution for street infrastructure, as well as competition for funding, is impacting the city's overall progress in these matters as they both seek to employ the same landscape and space for their respective programs.
Go ahead, sorry, they're filming something outside, and that's, I think, what...
Well, that's a good thing or bad, okay.
All right.
Today's discussion will focus on the report's overall objective, research process, and the recommendations grouped under Tier 1. Recommendations in this report are grouped in 3 tiers. Tier 1 primarily addresses structural changes to address multiple barriers to performance. Tier 2 speaks of tools and activities to better support the city's street and mobility infrastructure network. And Tier 3 comments to specific processes for improvement. Today's discussion will be only focused on Tier 1. The specific project tasks completed as part of this effort were an assessment of the current state of public works activities, an evaluation of options for coordinating services, the development of a long-term plan to improve accountability and service delivery. These tasks were completed with the aim of seeking the following long-term outcomes: improved coordination with internal and external partners, services are delivered in the most efficient and effective manner, an improved relationship between residents and their government. The project scope was a review of the collective infrastructure programs in the city. Out of scope, due to time constraints, was an analysis of each individual program, unless research and interviews overwhelmingly highlighted a specific program, which was then considered in more depth. This report, by definition of the scope, does not recommend any programmatic changes. Of note, while interviews were conducted with the city's proprietary departments like the Port of Los Angeles and the Department of Water and Power, due to coordination needs, this report does not recommend any changes to proprietary departments. To assess the current system, one of the major categories of research was speaking to a range of service providers in the city, as well as service users. Over 400 interviews were completed as part of this process. Employees were interviewed at multiple levels in the Department of Public Works and the Department of Transportation, as well as staff and leaders in the Department of Building and Safety, Department of Planning, General Services Department, and others. This report, unlike past ones related to these services, is also the first, I believe, in which interviews went beyond the top ranks of leadership to the division-level managers who were in charge of the day-to-day operations and service delivery for these programs. In addition to these qualitative interviews with city staff, meetings with external partners, site visits of infrastructure programs, meeting observations, internal data analysis, and benchmarking were also completed. Additional reports and research reviewed include academic reports, city charter, Los Angeles Administrative Code, city consultant reports, city ordinances, controller office audits, media articles, metro reports, neighborhood council reports, white papers, past board reports, and past management audits. The collective research across all areas showed agreement on 6 key themes as current inhibitors to performance. There were 6 identified through the research process. First, the lack of alignment preventing the city from providing the most efficient processes in delivering services due to differing goals and priorities. Lack of communication between bureaus, divisions, and departments, in some cases delaying services to constituents or project delivery. Lack of coordination across programs requiring support from multiple entities, either in the delivery of services or in responding to service gaps. Lack of customer centricity in prioritizing operational needs over the constituent experience. Lack of data use and technology, especially in data sharing across entities for program performance. and lack of planning proactively and strategically for overall infrastructure improvements. Each of the recommendations in the report addresses and ties back to one or more of these themes. As noted earlier, today's discussion will focus entirely on Tier 1. To reinforce the point, tiers refer to the scale of the recommendation, not the importance or the timing. Tier 1 specifically addresses structural changes aimed to address all 6 of the barriers to performance just described. Tier 1 recommendations are also designed to make improvements to the city's infrastructure delivery ecosystem, meaning any program that needs or uses the public right-of-way to execute its programs. Recommendations within Tier 1 are considered highest impact, seeking near-term approval. Items reference multiple programs and/or departments, could begin in the near term but may require some time for full implementation, and the cost for implementation may vary. Tier 1 benefits include removing fragmentation in decision-making and governance, creating better alignment and shared responsibility amongst street-related programs, applying a strategic lens to these programs in addition to a programmatic focus, and increasing accountability. Tier 1 includes 2 recommendations. Recommendation 1.1 leverages the full-time existing board by combining the oversight for street and transportation programs under one governing body. This would support improved coordination, alignment, synchronization, and service delivery. Single oversight authority refers to the commission level of governance and does not affect current leadership for either street or transportation programs and services. Street-related programs would continue to operate as normal. Transportation programs would continue to operate as normal. Employees would continue in their day-to-day tasks. As historical context, the city has only had a dedicated Department for Transportation for less than 40 years in this entire 200-plus year of history, although transportation programs did operate over time. The Department of Public Works has been operating over a century and was founded in 1905. This chart shows the distribution of street transportation and right-of-way programs with the current corresponding commission oversight across the bottom in black boxes. Everything connects with the street in the public right-of-way. It's how we move people and goods to different destinations. All of these programs share space on the public right-of-way, but the planning and execution is not always integrated in a way that benefits residents or minimizes disruptions to travel modes by coordinating maintenance and upgrade activities. As you can note by the lines on the graphic from the various boxes, there are multiple parts of the public right-of-way that are touched by many entities. A pedestrian crossing the street could unknowingly walk across a dozen different programs from one side of the street to the other, most of which are completely planned and executed in silos. The street itself is the binding element for all programs operating under, on, and over the street, and it is critical that these large investments made to the street are planned, executed, and protected to allow effective usage of the asset by the various programs that operate on its service, like mobility. As you can see from the sample of examples shown, transportation-related programs are already integrally tied to the Department of Public Works. These interdependencies or program overlaps are not temporary. In these programs, coordination and communication between these departments is necessary to deliver these programs, whether as the initial part of a process, the use of a street-related asset, or delivery of a streetscape or grant project. Decisions made on these programs, although they touch each other, are funded and executed, again, largely in silos. Why is integrated planning important? First, there's an increasing city liabilities related to on-street and infrastructure programs, leading to less money for constituent services. There's a constant effort to apply for new grants, adding to the existing backlog of projects that is now numbering the hundreds of millions of dollars. There's a lack of visibility between on-street and infrastructure programs for upcoming work, resulting in the undoing and redoing of work by multiple entities, wasting city dollars. Lack of coordination and communication when parts of a program live in multiple areas, leading to service delays, taking the street out of use for longer than required, and inconveniencing constituents. Lack of proactive planning because programs live in multiple groups with different priorities and goals with no incentives to collaborate. And finally, different accounting codes in each department renders the city unable to complete full program accounting for city investments in street and infrastructure program. Overall, we currently have very limited accountability for both public right-of-way and on-street programs because there is no overlap in oversight for these different components that work on the street. Through the research process, several dozen visits to various commissions across the city were made, including the Taxi Commission, Transportation Commission, the Board of Public Works. Others reviewed include the Police Commission, Harbor Commission, Airport Commission, Water and Power Board, and others. In terms of current oversight, members can see here the wide difference in oversight between the Board of Public Works and Infrastructure Programs against the two part-time commissions and Transportation. Within Public Works, meetings are held 3 times a week with 12 to 24 hours of oversight per month. By comparison, the commission topics for transportation often revolve around preferential parking permits, non-ambulatory permits, and discussion on taxi-related issues for a total of 1.5 to 3 hours per month. At a minimum, the board provides 6 times the oversight and time for infrastructure programs when compared to transportation. This imbalance is heavily outweighed against transportation. Given that mobility and the movement of people and goods would continue to be an important issue for the foreseeable future, the existing oversight is simply ineffective and does not offer the same level of protections and accountability held against the infrastructure portfolio. Alterations are being made to the infrastructure without any due process, transparency, or effective oversight. This recommendation proposes changing oversight for transportation programs at the commission level to enable a single governing body over both mobility and street-related infrastructure programs and services. The responsibilities currently under the part-time advisory commissions would transfer to the full-time Board of Public Works. For the first time in the city's history, on-street programs like striping and hard street programs like pavement and sidewalks would be aligned under one governing body. Both street and transportation programs would be at the same level, have equal levels of oversight. This raises the profile of both programs that currently work in isolation and shows our constituents that regardless of the independent execution of programs within divisions and groups, that there is at least one level of oversight where both programs are reviewed for opportunities to better collaborate with each other in terms of communication and coordination. This recommendation leaves current leadership of these areas exactly the same. Additional efficiencies would be gained by having one commission include the frequency of meetings and the scope of responsibilities. Moving from 1 to 2 meetings per month to 12 meetings per month immediately allows more opportunities to raise cross-functional program issues and successes. Bringing oversight under the board would raise accountability because decisions relating to most public right-of-way programs would rest with one body. Consideration of the user of the street and the surface of the street would be taken into account when planning, maintaining, altering, or upgrading infrastructure. To reiterate, transportation programs remain intact. This chart demonstrates the various levels and responsible parties for both transportation and street-related programs and services. At no point in the current levels of oversight or committee do street and transportation programs go to the same body for their programs, although both utilize the public right-of-way. It should not take or go or be elevated to the mayor or full council level before some parallel overlap happens between these programs. It should not require a resort back or a report back for these entities to coordinate with each other, and there should not be a competition for funding for these programs when they are serving users on the same city asset. The only change supported by this recommendation is altering commission oversight. This could be interpreted to mean extra bureaucracy, but in fact it streamlines and replaces 2 separate commission meetings for transportation with 1 meeting with an existing entity, the Board of Public Works. The Board of Public Works meets 3 times a week, offering multiple opportunities for transportation issues to be raised, which is not available to those programs at this current time. It does not add another level of oversight, it replaces one. Full-time board accountability can also provide reassurances that address many of the concerns that council members brought up during the budget process. It is easy to point to one another when mistakes and shortcomings occur. It is less likely to occur when an oversight body has both the authority and the responsibility to minimize these situations and help these entities to problem solve together. There is no one place, body, or entity that is held accountable for both of these assets in these programs currently. To further clarify and alleviate any concerns, no other level of either street or transportation programs are impacted by a change in commission oversight. Leadership, staff, programs, and funding remain exactly the same. The lack of alignment in these areas in planning and execution that even our own employees recognize and have voiced is that the city, unlike most other cities in the country, distinguishes between programs under transportation infrastructure and those under street infrastructure. However, transportation needs street infrastructure to operate. There are very few traditional transportation programs that can operate without access to the public right-of-way. Of the top 10 cities in the country, Los Angeles is the only one where it has these oversights split in multiple places. Of the top 20 cities, only Austin, Texas, and San Francisco, which is 1/10 our size, does not have services in one place. This change is intended to look beyond program execution at systems improvement, to elevate both streets and transportation, to heighten accountability, and to leverage funding. This change addresses all barriers to performance through the Boards of Public Works oversight. It creates alignment with one oversight entity for better accountability of all street-related programs, with no changes in day-to-day execution of programs, employee tasks, or leadership. It strengthens communication and tighter coordination opportunities. It focuses on the customer by minimizing disruptions, supporting the movement of goods and people, promoting safety and accessibility across the entire street and transportation portfolio, considers a data-driven approach across all programs for prospective improvements, for example, response time, and it has the ability to weigh both users of the street and the surface of the street in short and long-term planning. Additional technical items related to this commission change. First, this recommendation is not about reducing the importance of transportation programs in the city and increasing street programs or vice versa. This is about looking at the entire system in which these programs operate. This is about programs that utilize the same city asset, the street network, and the public right-of-way, which does not regularly occur at present under the current commissions. The recommendation leaves transportation exactly as is with the same scope and leadership that it currently has. Transferring oversight from the transportation and taxi commissions to the Board of Public Works helps raise the profile, speed, execution, and response of both transportation and street-related infrastructure programs in the city. By viewing infrastructure through a strategic lens, residents can have faith that the city is investing for impact and employing a people-centered approach across all public right-of-way programs. Second, having one oversight entity should lead to enhancements in both transportation-related and street-related services, as the leaders of these respective programs are held responsible for taking into account each other's programs and executing their own. There were too many examples that I heard where either of these entities shifts blame away from themselves to one another. When transportation issues arise, street programs may be related. When street-related issues arise, transportation programs may be related. When these programs don't work together, they both lose. And most importantly, our residents lose. Our residents should be confident that services are planned across all relevant agencies, that they are delivered safely, efficiently, and cost-effectively, that equity is exercised in execution, and that programs are accessible. Third, no employee task would change. What the staff member did the previous day are the same tasks that they would do the next day. This recommendation is about higher level accountability. At this critical juncture where new funding is available and new programs have been recently launched or in the process of launching, it is imperative that the city consider all possible paths to maximizing outcomes that benefit our residents. Fourth, multiple scenarios were considered to build better alignment across street-related programs, including moving hard infrastructure programs to transportation and the creation of a new standalone mobility department. These were not proposed for a number of reasons. First, the transfer of programs or a new department would not eliminate the need to coordinate for key activities like civil engineering or the use of infrastructure assets like the street light poles, and would still require contract approvals by the board. There is no guarantee that moving street-related programs under transportation improves their collective performance, or that transportation programs, if connected more concretely with street-related programs. Valid concerns about subordination by each other would stand in either case. The core responsibility of the Department of Public Works is in the planning, executing, and protecting of the public right-of-way, and moving street programs would substantially impact that mission. Finally, there is nothing to prevent transfers of functions at lower levels in the future after a thorough analysis has been completed about the potential upside of such moves. This review was not able to be completed during the process and is recommended as a next step within the report. It would be premature to make such moves without full knowledge about both the benefits and downside risks of any programmatic move. The mayor and the council certainly wouldn't want to diminish any level of services for our constituents. As the recommendation currently stands, it requires no movement of employee functions, programs, funding, or leadership. This recommendation is about becoming a better service provider for constituents, helping them better navigate the city, and working together better than we do now. The second recommendation in this tier is establishing an Office of Infrastructure Management for the city to be housed within the Board of Public Works. Simply bringing transportation and infrastructure programs together under the same oversight entity will not break down silos between these programs in terms of planning or execution. Adding a set of programs to the Department of Public Works also increases the portfolio of programs under the management of the board. To maximize the benefits of consolidated decision-making, the city needs a consistent resource that will focus entirely on looking at cross-functional program improvements at intersections of programs and using a data-driven approach for process improvements and program improvements that emphasize long-term planning for asset management and capital planning. An overarching department-wide support group that will systematically look at improving the overall infrastructure and transportation network and meeting the expectations of our constituents is the mechanism by which potential benefits of having these various programs under one umbrella can be maximized. Instead of looking at the street in color-coded boxes or distinct programs, the city can use this office to collectively consider the intersection as a whole, from corner to corner. What outcomes are we trying to achieve that requires use of the city's street network? This group will help identify opportunities to save money, and it is anticipated to pay for itself. This is not additional bureaucracy, it is a new efficiency. This is also a practice currently in many other cities, including Chicago, San Antonio, Denver, and Washington, D.C. Metro also has a fairly new team dedicated to organization-wide innovation. The graphic before you shows the most common street-related and public works programs in the middle circle labeled programs, with additional programs from other departments, regulatory agencies, and city initiatives that also need access to the public right-of-way in the outer circle. Instituting some guidelines and key outcomes that every city program should aim to achieve, like safety, would help bring a level of alignment and collective ownership for these programs. Currently, planning when it happens occurs in isolation for a specific asset type. For example, planning for street trees, sidewalks, sidewalk bending, streetlights, all part of the public right-of-way, are managed by different groups. Even planning for the same asset can be done by multiple departments in silos. While this makes sense in some areas from an operational basis, a corresponding effort to strategically manage the infrastructure assets in a cohesive manner has not been prioritized. Part of this has been a lack of staff housed on forward-looking planning. The city operates more than 50 infrastructure programs across the Department of Public Works and Transportation in the public right-of-way. Some combination of these programs and assets exists on every single city block in the city. Yet there is no group reviewing, coordinating, and planning activities across multiple groups and programs in a consistent way that spans administrations. The investments that the city makes in these services, like sewers, streets, and water, are intended to last decades, if not generations. Although overlaps exist in many of these programs, each bureau and department is only considering, seeing, and prioritizing its own work in a silo. Having an office that has visibility into all of the areas that operate into the street provides a stronger opportunity to collectively manage and apply a strategic approach towards infrastructure and mobility programs. Today I'll be sharing two examples of how breaking down planning silos will support the city as it strives to meet citywide priorities and constituent expectations. The first is project planning. Today I'm sharing a simplified example of how better project planning could be implemented, but this would be refined with council and mayor input once policy guidance is issued. The city is also working to reinstitute a capital policy that would help with related large-scale project planning. Ideally, the city would want to start with an outcomes-driven approach. What results are we working to achieve for our residents? This example uses both mobility and the environment as priorities. That would then be matched with all of the proposed projects requested by departments. Here there's 100 proposed projects. How many have a mobility component? How many have an environmental component? How many have both? Which of these projects has potentially the largest number of benefits to touch the largest number of Angelinos? Once projects have been assigned criteria, then review occurs of the available current funding and upcoming funding cycles to leverage all funding sources. A review of the current workloads for any relevant departments is completed to ensure capacity availability and agreement from any partnering agencies. A subset of projects is selected for funding, and all projects are linked to funding and priorities. Here, the example is half were funded at 50 projects. Once funded and awarded, the current STPOC, or the Street Transportation Project Oversight Committee, works with the street and transportation areas to track the project. Unfunded proposed projects remain on the list to be reviewed as new funding becomes available. At the conclusion of the project, a postmortem is completed to assess how closely the project estimate matches the actual cost and account for variances. This data can then be used for similar project scoping in the future. Was the project completed on time? Depending on the project and intended outcomes, for example, pedestrian safety, a follow-up of the project in 1 year or 2 years can show if people are actually walking more. Departments track their own projects at varying levels, but this does not aid policymakers and senior staff who are looking to understand the full landscape of projects across the city or group of programs. How many active projects have a green infrastructure component across city departments? How many will increase walkability and pedestrian safety options? These are the types of strategic questions that can be answered with a complete picture of current projects. This data can then drive applications and project approvals for potential future projects based on existing gaps, historical data on cost overruns and time delays, whether or not projects were general or special funded. Understanding the full landscape of projects would also enhance coordination opportunities with other general maintenance and asset improvements. Instead of shutting down a traffic lane multiple times over a period of 6 months or a year, like a grant project followed by a streetscape project, then a maintenance project, all of these can be more easily coordinated to minimize disruptions to our constituents, in addition to making investments that support the needs of our constituents. This example focuses on planning and coordination gains using data, specifically LA 311 data, beyond request fulfillment. The city has established the LA 311 system to enable constituents to report service gaps. This often provides information to city programs that normally would not know that an issue exists. Service request categories are assigned and routed to a single agency responsible for that particular program or service, meaning all related data goes to one group. Street lighting data goes to street lighting, graffiti-related data goes to the Office of Community Beautification, etc. Between these programs and the Department of Public Works and the Department of Transportation, there are 4 different call centers. 3 use the 311 system for inputting data, while Transportation has built its own system, which serves both as an internal work order system and an input system for service gaps. All 4 have dedicated phone numbers and do not solely use or promote 311 as a single contact point for submitting requests. Often requests come into the same location from multiple agencies unknown to these various groups that may be responding to a service request for their area of expertise. Citywide programs that have multiple agencies assigned, like cleanliness, often do not have access to all of the data coming through the LA 311 portal. For example, service requests related to illegal dumping and graffiti abatement could occur at the same location. Those are inputted 2 separate times, routed to 2 separate groups, and are completed by 2 separate teams. Response by 2 city agencies could be fine in terms of specialization. It may absolutely be appropriate. But what the city would want to minimize is having the graffiti crew show up before the illegal dumping is removed and being blocked from actually delivering their job of cleaning up graffiti on the walls. Being able to look across data silos to help these agencies with sequencing response activities would be helpful. The city certainly does not want to have a crew show up, waste city dollars, time, and hours when they're unable to complete the task at hand. A quick thanks to the ITA data team for help with this next insight, but what was learned from overlaying cleanliness-related services together and splitting the city into its census blocks was that 40% of the requests related to these programs were coming from census blocks with more than 100 requests. The highest census block had more than 1,000 requests over the past 2 fiscal years. Within those 1,000 requests, 70% had multiple agencies responding to that census block. For funded service categories, LA 311 is used as a portal to help guide assignments for frontline crews from a tactical perspective. but not as a planning tool. For example, strategic questions that could be answered by regular review of the data include request overlap in neighborhoods or streets to coordinate cleanups, tactical deployment of resources to common request areas. The data can also serve as an indicator of quality. If a request reappears for the same service like tree trimming or potholes, perhaps the service was not completed to the necessary level from the original request. It could also indicate a larger service issue or that a different type of intervention is needed. The city collects an enormous amount of data about its programs and processes. However, the organization does not have sufficient resources or staff with the right skill sets to regularly review this data to help inform better decisions. The Office of Infrastructure Management could be a consistent resource that is continually available to the board and its bureaus in analyzing data, building models, assessing program cost, and combining complementary data sets to improve customer satisfaction. Some potential benefits for this office include break down silos by providing a holistic strategic lens on the overall strategic infrastructure network, looking at the intersections and the complete street experience instead of individual programs. Look at past issues with intersections and parts of the street to develop best practices in installing and maintaining streets throughout the city. It would also help look at the timing of potential maintenance needs across programs to shut down and minimize inconvenience to residents. Run models and analysis to capture return on investment on city expenditures in the infrastructure network. And it would be responsible for executing cross-functional data analyses across programs to maximize execution on the street. Program-specific planning would continue to function as it does now. This office, in this recommendation 1.2, would support, again, all barriers to performance. Would help align activities and goals for agencies that are dependent on the street. Would break down communication silos by serving as a clearinghouse for interdepartmental and intra-bureau related programs. Identify opportunities for coordinating activities by leading cross-functional data analyses. Emphasize outcomes for the customer. It would build in past incidences and maintenance activities in planning for future investments and upgrades. So to close, these programs are inextricably connected with each other because they overlap the same city asset, the street. We need to build a common set of ownership, responsibility, and pride that goes beyond programs to really focus on the infrastructure network itself. Let's stop looking at programs and boxes and start looking at intersections and users of the street. This is ultimately how we make our residents safer, make transportation modes more accessible, strengthen controls and oversight over the street, and better plan for street-related improvements. Opportunities for system-level coordination and integration are being lost within the current tactical program planning and initiatives. This is preventing the city from understanding the level or types of improvements being made across the city related to infrastructure and mobility programs and services. Anything outside of council-mandated or mayor-initiated systems planning is absent between these agencies working on the street. A stronger bond is required. Streets and sidewalks are an integral part of transportation, and transportation is an integral function operating on the public right-of-way. To strengthen the city's planning, maintenance, execution of its infrastructure and related activity, there needs to be a single oversight authority that does not disrupt current operations or employee tasks and does not risk any of our current programs. This oversight authority is then supported by an office committed and dedicated to looking at areas of overlap where the city can be more efficient about delivering programs by leveraging funding, project and capital planning, as well as customer data. Both of these functions would be a first in the city's history, building on past actions to boost both infrastructure investments in our city and all of the programs that the network sustains. If the population continues to grow, the city's needs to bring existing infrastructure into a state of good repair by using a targeted and strategic approach to ensure that as our constituent needs change, that the city is ready and able to adapt to those changes. At the very basic level, it comes back to this: how we are organized. If the city feels at this level of silos, this many splits and overlapping programs, the imbalance in oversights, that this is a model and a best practice that should be emulated by other cities and leads to superior performance, that's a choice that this body needs to make. However, if this body chooses to acknowledge the issues related to these programs and is willing to use this opportunity to make long-term changes that could lead to direct service improvements for constituents, I encourage you to debate the merits of not only these recommendations, but the others included in the report. There are streets in the city that are 50, 80 years old, and the street is constantly being pulled in many directions as it adapts to all of the different ways that people want to travel from place to place, whether that is using your own 2 feet, two-wheel motor transportation, or a 4-wheel lift or cars, 8 wheels on a bus. To apply a user lens in how we plan, execute, and protect the public right-of-way for constituents is absolutely critical as we move forward. Use this opportunity to make systemic change, not only for the constituents that you serve today, but for your children and the generations to come. Thank you for allowing me to present to committee today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you very much, and appreciate the very thorough presentation, but also all the work that you put in to get us to this point. So we really do appreciate that. Just to put a fine point, you stated this a few times, but does this proposal eliminate any jobs? Does it create any jobs? Does it change the chain of command within any of the departments? As just a overview question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Does the proposal eliminate any jobs? Does it create any jobs? Does it change the chain of command in any of the departments specifically?
As proposed, no jobs are eliminated. Potentially a few new jobs are created depending on which approach we want to take in creating the Office of Infrastructure Management. Because if we add new positions to create that, then that's new additional jobs. The city could elect to look at, say, positions within each of the bureaus and transfer a position to the board. Ideally a vacancy, most likely a vacancy.
I appreciate that in terms of the overline.
But those are options. But the realignment or functional transfer of DOT and the Board of Public Works, the only reporting change there is the oversight body, which would bring it under the Board of Public Works and eliminate the transportation and taxi commissions. Other than that, there's no proposed changes within the organizational structure of DOT, the elimination of positions or anything like that. And obviously the reporting to various council committees and so on, that is decided through the council committee structure with the council president's office. So that would all stay the same, unless council chose to change that.
No impact on the council structure. I guess I was asking it in some ways for the benefit of all the workers who may be listening to this, hearing, wondering if their lives on a day-to-day basis are going to be changed in any way because of this proposal. So I wanted to be real clear. If we adopt this recommendation, or if we don't adopt this recommendation, to hear it very clearly, the person you report to is still the same.
Correct.
The job you go, the furniture, the office that you're in, does any of that change? Your program manager, does that change? Anything to that effect?
It would not with the recommendation as proposed.
Okay. Thank you for that. And then you talked about all the folks that you talked to bringing in. When you were doing all the work for this, tell us a little bit about the stakeholders that you spoke with. Did you speak with the project managers? Did you speak with the unions? Did you speak with the department heads? Tell us a little bit about that, because we hear from a lot of folks.
Being a consultant with the city, obviously I don't have any background or connection. I have no reason to propose one body or another. So I was given an initial list of about maybe 4 different groups: council, the Board of Public Works, obviously the mayor's office, and the Department of Transportation. I spoke to the entire leadership team of transportation. I spoke to the entire leadership team within the Board of Public Works, all of the commissioners. Every single council office had staff that was interviewed perhaps multiple times for this project. As I started the interview process, I learned that the integration of these services and the transparency and visibility of them required more of an extensive interview process. And so my initial list of about 50 names grew to 100, and then 200, and then obviously much larger to 410 exactly interviews. Some of the external partners that were interviewed were Metro, Caltrans, AQMD, the Metropolitan Water District. So there's a wide range of different partners within the organization, external, that were given an opportunity to comment on how these services currently work, what were the partnership opportunities, and what are some areas of opportunities for improvement as well. So I wanted to highlight both things that were going well and things that weren't going well to balance out criticism. I think as a consultant you come in and people always think you're going to give a laundry list of things that don't work well, but there were many things, if you look at the qualitative interview section, that actually operated quite well.
So a question about the liability claims. You mentioned liability claims that have been paid out. How much do you think moving DOT under the Department of Public Works could reduce liability, and why?
So in the past 3 years, as a culmination of approximately $90 million in liabilities, all of that money could have gone, obviously, to services, and that applies for any single department, not just Department of Transportation. I don't want to comment too much from the city attorney perspective, but my understanding is that a large segment of those liabilities stem from bike lane injuries. And so when you are installing bike lanes on the public right-of-way...
Installing what?
Installing bike lanes on the public right-of-way. And so when you're, again, operating a program on an infrastructure network that's perhaps not in the condition it needs to be, that leads to, coordination and communication errors. So I believe opportunities like that, where the Office of Infrastructure Management could help identify, working with the council and the mayor to establish criteria where things like that wouldn't happen, would lead to, I think, a substantial decrease in liabilities. I can't put a number on it, but I think it would be substantial.
I have a lot of questions, but I want to make sure I'm going through with my colleagues. I know Mr. Buscaino has a hard stop on his time, so I'm going to turn next to my Vice Chair, Mr. Buscaino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your presentation. And if you weren't well versed with the city, I'm sure you are now. This is an issue, as former chairman of this committee for 4 years, 5 years, it has been just a challenging issue on governance and accountability and efficiency, and I've long awaited this report. And I like the fact, Mr. Chair, that you do raise the issue of our employees. This is, let me be clear, this is not a knock of the men and women who work for these respective departments. My trash was picked up on time this morning. We owe a debt of gratitude to the work that they do day in and day out. We are just seeking efficiencies so that they can do their jobs better, especially in a time where today we are seeing an influx of dollars coming into the city on infrastructure projects, Measure M dollars, SB 1 dollars. So now more than ever, we need to rethink on how we govern in the Department of Public Works. And with the liability issue, oftentimes, colleagues, we have sat in the closed session in the payouts of, potholes and bike lanes, and we scratch our heads and we ask ourselves, why in the hell did that happen? So I think when we look at these recommendations, we will prevent and save dollars on liability payouts. And so I'm excited about moving forward on this. A question I asked, and I know I asked you when we met, when you briefed me on this, but I think the public should know, what you're recommending here, will this require any charter changes, vote of the people, or not?
No, the changes recommended as proposed are simply ordinance changes. Requires no change to the charter at all. It requires no voter referendum.
Are there any labor issues per contract that we're in right now based on the recommendations?
None that I'm aware of, but I don't know if CAO wants to comment.
Based on our existing contract with our labor partners, are there any issues with our existing contract based on the recommendations before us?
So under the charter, the city can do functional transfers, which is what the transfer of DOT into Public Works would be. There is the potential that employees might identify impacts that they felt accrued from that, and we would have an obligation to do impact bargaining to the extent that those were identified. That is, to my understanding, the only sort of employee relations impact of this. If you need, we can have an employee relations person talk to you as well.
Okay. So I'm happy to see these recommendations come forward. I have once experienced an issue in my neighborhood where the trash was being picked up on the day that the street was being slurried. So they shut down the street so that we can slurry the street, but at the same time, it was the same day as a trash pickup, so neighbors were going berserk. So again, I'm just wanted to paint a picture for you on how I think the recommendations before us will eliminate the type of coordination and collaboration and communication, and looking forward to seeing these changes come through. Thank you.
Ms. Martinez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So do we know what the fiscal and budgetary implications are of this plan? Do we know the cost of moving the department over to Public Works? And I would, if the council chooses to move in this direction, this would definitely be a conversation during budget deliberations, right?
Correct, which is one of the reasons why we feel that this is an action that's best taken in the context of the budget.
But do we have any sense of what the budgetary implications are going to be?
There are no sort of...
We have to have a sense of a number.
I
This
don't
can't
have
be
a sense
free
of
and
the
it's not gonna
number.
be cheap.
Because we wouldn't need to immediately physically be moving anybody, DOT would still stay in its same offices, but Public Works departments would stay in their same offices. There may be some small changes like to business cards or things like that, and there is some administrative work of,
See, I don't
Civil
believe
Service
that that's-
Commission needs to do actions, but these aren't things where we're adding things. The only place where we might add things is creating this new Office of
I
Infrastructure.
haven't been here for a long time, but I know that even if you put a nail in the wall, it costs something. So trust me.
I'm just not sure that...
I've not carry a hammer with me because
we have
it's
not
unbelievable
yet
what
done
what
any...
little things like that amount to. So there's got to be a cost associated to something like this. So I would appreciate that we have an honest conversation about that, what that looks like, because there's got to be a number. Nothing here is ever free.
So, as proposed, just to reiterate what the Assistant CAO, Patty Huber, was saying is, for 1.1, because it's just a functional transfer, there's no financial impact for implementing that proposal as stated. 1.2, because that is the creation of a new Office of Infrastructure Management, depending on the staffing levels, depending on the initial focus that you guys will want to prioritize, that would obviously have some kind of cost. If you look at page, let me just look here, 1.2, page 80, if you have the full report in front of you, it identifies a number of different implementation options. Depending on the direction that council would want to employ, each one of those would have a different cost.
My second question is, how would this impact the existing workforce? Are there any labor or civil service challenges associated to this transfer that we've identified?
The current workforce, so again, the proposal as presented in the report does not change functional tasks for any employees. It's just changing the governance oversight. So literally everything that is being currently planned and executed the way it is continues as is. The Office of Infrastructure Management is the only labor cost associated with either one of these in Tier 1.
Have our labor partners weighed in on the plan? Do we know how they feel? Are they one of the groups you met with?
No.
The other question I have, so previously the department was under Public Works, based on my background and the information that I read over the weekend.
Yes.
Why didn't that work in the past, and what makes us think that this solution will now be, the solution you have before us would be, it would work now, but it had not worked in the future, and I'm sorry, in the past?
So there's quite a difference between the way that the Department of Transportation was founded in the late 70s and what we're proposing today. The Department of Transportation, there was a former Public Works Bureau called Bureau of Transportation that included functions like traffic engineering, but it also, at that time, there was many more fragmentations in the current program portfolio that's currently under transportation. So there was a Department of Traffic that was managing all the traffic signals. Parking enforcement was actually under the Los Angeles Police Department. There was a separate Department of Public Utilities and Transportation which held responsibility for taxi and gas franchise. And so it was really a much larger consolidation and transfer of functions. That is exactly the opposite of what we're recommending here. So I would imagine that that type of move, that type of transfers of massive amounts of employees from multiple departments would have caused much more anxiety. than the proposal presented to you today that is actually just about changing the governance oversight and not changing any employee tasks.
Did you ever consider, in looking at transferring the Department to Public Works, did you ever consider possibly moving functions of Public Works to DOT? And the reason I ask is because they already manage grants for BOE and BSS. So would it make sense to move some of the functions over to DOT? Did you look at that possibility?
So I did mention in the remarks before that there simply wasn't time to do a full programmatic analysis in the time that I was given. It was a year-long.
Do you think that's worth looking into, perhaps?
So
transferring
that
some
question has come up
responsibilities
to
over
me.
to DOT?
The question has come up, and why didn't you recommend more of a hard connection between street and transportation programs? And one of the scenarios that was analyzed was even just a standalone mobility department, not merging, street services into DOT or vice versa. First of all, there's no evidence to point that street programs would operate more efficiently if that were to occur, and vice versa. There would be no evidence at this point in time that transportation programs would operate more efficiently if under street services. There's no, the first step in any change between these entities and any others in the infrastructure program portfolio would require a full programmatic analysis, which is recommended as a follow-up activity in the report. The results from that follow-up exercise would better inform any program, not just between these entities, but others that may be better suited in other areas than their current division. And if any programmatic changes are completed moving forward, ideally all of those changes would occur at once. And something like that at a lower level of governance would require discussions with labor.
And you mentioned cities that were moving into consolidating their departments. I know San Antonio and Dallas have already done something similar.
Yeah.
Do we know if it's working there? I know Oakland has a separate department.
Yeah.
And I believe Denver is too. Do we have any idea of how that's working?
I did. I actually interviewed all of the directors in those respective municipalities, and they pointed to multiple types of benefits in terms of, I'm going to misquote, but one of the cities actually had enough savings and efficiencies where they created an urban forestry division that they didn't have before. We're able to have dedicated resources looking at the urban landscape.
What city was that?
It was one of the cities in Texas. I think it was Dallas, actually.
Mr. Chair, I would actually like to ask the CLA to report back on, with an analysis on some of the recommendations in this report, looking at some of the questions and some of the concerns that have been asked in this committee.
Okay.
It was Dallas.
Thank you.
Ms. Rodriguez.
Thank you. And I know we're pressed for time, but thank you for all of those that time spent on doing all of those interviews. I know you and I met, which was fascinating to me because we didn't actually talk about DOT and street services. We had longer conversations about sanitation. So of the conversations of the 400 interviews, how many were really directly focused on the conversation of potential consolidation as it relates to these two specific entities?
From the commission level, so I had some general questions about, I don't know if you remember the exact interview, but I had questions about rating the efficiency of how well we deliver these services now, and I flipped the question asking, how well do you think residents would rate these services? I did do a split in terms of how does transportation rate, how does Public Works rate, how does even DWP and some of our other programs rate, because they're all part of our infrastructure portfolio. So a number of people were interviewed and asked that question, which provided an average. I didn't have this slide in this presentation, but there's a slide that shows a scale that says we rate ourselves 7 out of 10 above average on delivering these services, and there was a corresponding constituent rating of 3.5. That was a consolidated rating of both transportation and Public Works services across the city. So depending on the conversation, because honestly some of the interviews ran two hours or more, because they got so engaged in the conversation. So our conversation may have stemmed off more on Public Works, but others had more of a transportation focus.
Okay. Having spent 3 years on the Board of Public Works, it was a fascinating time for the tenure that I spent because it was shortly after the economic downturn. There was still, many of the bureaus had been decimated through the early retirements and whatnot, and I know that several of these agencies are still, as well as the Department of Transportation, are still at a net deficit in terms of staffing levels, and I know that's also one of the biggest challenges that many of our departments have been suffering through. That said, some of what I have concerns with in looking at these tiered recommendations, I do see benefits of having some of the initial conversations and focus around some of these technological solutions that I think are some of the low-hanging fruit that would be really easy to implement and probably far more cost-effective and thoughtful in trying to problem solve versus some, for me, what I consider something that we've moved away from, which was actually extracting the Department of Transportation from the Department of Public Works. And so I would actually like, I have a stronger preference to have a deeper dive conversation on the other tiered recommendations. Frankly, for me, as a comfort level, because when you have the conversations about silos, it's something that's bantered about quite a bit in governance. Doesn't matter what level of government you talk about silos. What I will say from personal experience, having been on the Board of Public Works, I've personally seen increased cooperative relationships between the Bureau of Engineering, the Department of Transportation, and Bureau of Street Services in helping to align a lot of the priorities that are set by the City Council and the Mayor, particularly as it relates to our districts. So I've actually seen the opposite of that, and I've seen great improvement in that. What I continue to be focused on is trying to make sure that we support the leadership in providing them the staff resources that they need to actually be successful in achieving the goals that we have identified and put out as a governing body. With that, what I would actually like to recommend is I would like to see some of the proposals that you've identified in these other tiers and Tier 2 as something that I would like to work on as the chair of the Information Technology Committee to see how we can apply some technical solutions to helping to better coordinate when you talk about the work on our public right-of-way. Those are things that could be best coordinated through Navigate LA and maybe perhaps making certain improvements on that, providing that functionality that could be better support systems to helping to coordinate. Because, when my colleague, Councilman Buscaino, talks about how the slurry seal isn't coordinated with the trash pickup, those are both under the Board of Public Works right now. So that doesn't necessarily solve a lot of the challenges that we're talking about here. I think when we talk about consolidations, what I would like to see are some of the technical tools that we could employ that I think would be far greater beneficial and net immediate results than having a conversation about a consolidation of these two departments. And that's based on 3 years of being on the Board of Public Works and having a 6-month tenure on the City Council. Those are my pieces.
And certainly, we're not talking about consolidation of the departments, just the reporting mechanism. But your point is well taken.
So, could I just have a comment?
Yeah. So as it relates to, I'd like to report that with the assistance with ITA, DOT be instructed to develop systems to interface and identify technological tools for the enhancement of will Navigate LA to include a utility coordination system that would provide accurate and timely information regarding the activities as they occur on the public right-of-way. And I would like to start working on that.
Happy to second it.
And that's fine. I mean, that certainly, I think that's going to be part of our Tier 2 and Tier 3 discussion. But I fully support the notion of what you're doing. We can put that out there now, or we can wait till our next meeting when we're going to really get into the meat and potatoes of the Tier 2 and Tier 3.
No, I understand that. My concern is I feel like these, when we're talking about a shift in the governance structure, that we're not having a conversation about providing some of the technical tools that I think would provide some of the immediate net benefits that we're actually seeking rather than kind of overhauling this governance structure. And that's where I would prefer to see us move in that type of direction. I think that we haven't, again, I don't know that we have sufficiently supported with the staffing levels that I think would be, that would net the results that we're seeking, but more importantly, I also think that there's a great opportunity for us to invest in some of the technical support that would get us closer to where we want to be.
Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for having a fresh set of eyes take a look at it, look at our current systems, and it's always refreshing to see different viewpoints. I know this has been discussed a lot. I just want to get straight to it. I have two questions. One of them, in your interviews with all these different departments and everyone, did you see a difference between, and it goes to what Councilmember Rodriguez was talking about, was there more efficiencies or more synergies or more better outcomes within the bureaus in the Public Works Department versus Public Works working with someone like DOT or Planning Department? I mean, were you able to, I don't know, somehow quantify that? Or?
There's definitely a range of collaboration depending on the bureau, the division, the program manager. I couldn't say that one department works more effectively than another, but I can say that I interviewed a lot of different employees between the two of them, and I personally was a little bit surprised in the way they refer to each other. It sounded like when they got a hold of somebody, they would listen to whatever the issue is, but then they would say, oh, but they're not going to do anything. They're not going to help me.
So is that a conversation between BOE and BSS, or is that a conversation
that happened between transportation and Public Works, and I heard that from both sides.
But it didn't happen within Public Works?
I heard that as well, but remember, I'm analyzing the portfolio, right? Okay. So.
And secondary, you were talking about on slide 24 about how data lives in silos with no cross analysis. I think somewhere in your report you also talked about how many different programs or how many different languages do we have in the city of LA?
You said programs?
Programs or languages?
Just like IT systems?
Yes.
So when I first started, I heard across the city was more than 1,000.
Yeah, more than 1,000, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just integrating managers or integrating staff. It's also actual data being able to be transferred to other departments. I mean, this happens not just within Public Works, but sometimes building and safety will cite somebody, but it doesn't get to the planning department for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, right? So it's a bigger problem. I think this is a fascinating report. I really support Councilman Martinez's. I want to get a deeper dive into it with the CLA. In government structures, and I've worked in bureaucracy before, and I've been told, and I didn't know this before, but after working in government for a long time, it turns out that bureaucracy ends to always split apart, then come together. Like in the county, it's the health department and the mental health department. Every 10 years or so, they split up because for whatever reason, it's a better idea to split them up because for more efficiencies. And then, of course, 10 years later, everyone says it needs to come back together for efficiencies.
It's the same in corporate.
So you could come up with arguments pros and cons either way. And it seems like you're proposing here not a complete combination, absorption of DOT into Public Works, but at least just a governance structure or the oversight. It might be a good idea. That's why I want to see a deeper dive with the CLA, but I'm not fully convinced yet. But what I am super excited about is your 1.2, and I would hope your motion includes 1.2, which is your Office of Infrastructure Management. Because, I think back in May or June of 2016, I introduced a budget motion based on this very same issue. And back then we called it Office of Construction Coordination, but whatever you call it, it's the same thing. It's about that issue about, when the street gets repaved, why do they come right afterwards and tear it up for DWP power lines or trash pickup or construction, you name it. So I think I really, really want to see 1.2 vetted out because no matter what governance we have, I think it needs to be on the ground. We need to actually have, and I know Public Works, when I first got elected, that's one of the first questions I asked Public Works. Why do I keep on hearing all this rhetoric about, why do you resurface something only to tear it apart the next day? And I've been told that the city's already been working on it, that city departments are trying to come together. But then later on, that's the same, what I found out later, that's not really the case. And many departments have already been advocating for something like the Office of Construction Coordination or Office of Infrastructure Management. So that is something that I would really like to see. And one thing is, when it comes to Office of Infrastructure Management or whatever we call it, why stop with DOT? Why not include Public Works? Department of Water and Power, Department of Planning and Building and Safety, because it's not just street repair or pothole repair and what Public Works is doing. It's also, if there's a developer building a huge, massive hotel, they're going to tear up the street too. And many times, those permits aren't relayed across our different programs to DOT or Public Works. So I'm glad that you looked between these two departments, and it looks like, you got a lot of great information. I don't want to expand your already 1 year worth of work, but this is something that I think at a more of a micro level and more of an actual seeing some results, the Office of Infrastructure Management is something that we should really, really develop out, because once you start trying to merge everything or starting to do governance of all these different agencies, then that's kind of what the city council does and the mayor does, right? So I don't want to, and I know your findings found that, just it's not going to be extra governance, it's not going to be extra bureaucracy, but I'm not fully convinced yet, and I'd like to see, CLA report on it, but the actual Office of Infrastructure Management, which has been asked for years, and I think my budget motion in 2016 even had a dollar figure of $318,000, right? So in the report back, I would really love if we could include the motion that I had that's in the dockets, in our Public Works docket for Office of Construction Coordination, to be included and assessed. Yes.
Certainly, we can add that in.
So I just want to clarify a couple of things about, because I know I've heard some feedback about, can 1.2 move forward with that 1.1? So I don't want to focus too much on the fact about governance. The governance change or commission oversight change was proposed because it's addressing all 6 barriers to performance. So the discussion really should focus on addressing those barriers and what is the most effective way to do that. If we were coordinating perfectly today, it would be already happening. The way that it is happening, I guess you mentioned a couple of different ways. The 2400 working group is a great one. BOE runs a sidewalk repair group meeting monthly that works really, really well, includes, I think, a dozen or more different departments. Those things happen in isolation. They're either mayor initiated, they're council initiated, it's required by report back. These things and the culture change that's required is not going to happen organically, because if it could, it already would be happening. So if the city's aim is to improve safety and increase multimodal options, reduce injuries, liabilities that are really showing that the city is not achieving its goal, part of that is the misalignment in oversight. That is a question that this body is going to have to answer. The Transportation and Taxi Commissions, I don't know if any of you all have had the privilege of sitting in those meetings, is not serving the function that it needs to, certainly by far and away.
Right, and that's why I'm saying, why stop at DOT and Public Works then? Why not include DWP? Why not include Planning Department? Why not include Building and Safety? Why not include all these other departments? And next thing you know, that's the struggle we deal with every day.
I'd like to, and I have a great example of that, and I think Ray Chan did an outstanding job. He didn't change the governance structure. What he did was he invited Public Works, Fire Department, Planning Department, everyone to work in collaboration with one another so that we could have a more efficient way of dealing with some of our planning processes in development and conversations.
I have a solution. Just hire all women.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, let's just stop beating around the bush and hire more women GMs, and that'll solve all of your problems.
Well, that's a nice kudos to our new executive director of street lighting. I just want to touch on, because I think we're getting a lot of technology solutions, which is really tier 2 and 3. I'll go in more detail with that in a future meeting. But to your point about additional departments, if you look at page 85 in the full report, it identifies a number of departments for that technology solution that include building and safety, cultural affairs, the police department, the fire department, all of the people that touch the public right-of-way, whether it's the surface for special events, parades, protests, or substructure improvements like trench work by our private entities as well. So I'm very much aware of the work that other people do outside of the city to our streets, and looking at how we can preserve those investments made by our taxpayers.
I see Mr. James is here, our Public Works Commissioner. I understand you may want to say a word or two about this. Would you want to?
I just wanted to say a few things.
Just use the mic. That's all we ask.
I think I'm in this room enough. I figured out how to use this microphone. The first thing I wanted to say was thank you to everyone for the hard work that's gone into this. This is obviously your decision. I was listening to the discussion, and one thing I wanted to make very clear, we certainly support as deep of a dive as you all want to go into with the CLA, anybody else that wants to be part of the process. The time that Ms. Al-Quresh and the steering committee put in was significant. I believe, I think Council Districts 6, 11, 3, and 15 were the 4 council districts that had representatives. And the main message I wanted you all to know is, if it's something that you are interested in exploring further, the Board of Public Works is very willing, very happy, and indeed would be honored to welcome the Department of Transportation under the oversight of the Board of Public Works. We work with DOT and the general manager and the leadership of DOT every single day. We have a number of transportation items that already come before the Board of Public Works for approval. We work with the Department of Transportation daily in filming issues, and our petroleum administration issues. Obviously, with the Bureau of Engineering, the one that's been discussed the most is the one that's most obvious to the public, and that's the Bureau of Street Services. We would welcome it for any number of reasons, most of which, indeed all of which, have been communicated here today. But from a personal perspective, and something that I'm most proud about with the Board of Public Works and the work that we've done, and Councilwoman Rodriguez is certainly very aware of it, discussing her time on the Board of Public Works. We are here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning at 10 a.m. And for all of the issues that touch in the public right-of-way, we provide an opportunity for our constituents to be heard and to have their issues placed immediately and instantly and in live action in front of the oversight body and we try very hard. We sometimes are admonished, not often though, by our city attorney with the Brown Act, because we even if we are just getting general public comment, we do our best to be able to respond, if possible, immediately. And much of the work that we do in the Board of Public Works now, it's in many ways a mediation body. We have taken our above-ground facilities issues, we have taken very controversial tree removal issues, and acted as a mediation body to get parties to agreements so that we don't have the lawsuits that fly back and forth, so that we have all parties leaving satisfied. And it's a very unique oversight system and structure that most other cities don't have, that our city gets the benefit from. And there's no other commission that has the privilege or the ability to do so, because they're not full-time. We're here not just the 3 days a week, but we're here 5 days a week, 6 days, 7 days, when we're talking about community events and things that we do. So we're that accessible to the public, and I feel like for the critical role that the Department of Transportation plays in everyday lives of our constituents, not just the people that live here and work here, but the people that visit here, the unique opportunity of having a full-time oversight board that's accessible to work with the Department of Transportation is an added benefit that I just want to put an exclamation point on. And that's really it. Thank you.
I really do appreciate that, and for me, that's one of the most, like my colleagues, I have a lot of questions, but that's, to me, is one of the most compelling issues, is that the oversight body is here, it exists, it's day to day, and that is a good thing for community and for governance. So, we're not gonna decide this today on on this issue. We're going to hear Tier 2 and Tier 3 in the next hearing, and at that hearing, we'll also have the benefit of getting some CLA analysis as well. And I see the General Manager for DOT. I want to give you, Ms. Reynolds, if you wanted to say a few words now, or you could do it in the next hearing, you're more than welcome to say a few words. We'd love to hear from you in terms of your perspective, and that'll also help drive what CLA says as well.
Sure, very happy to do that.
And I don't mean to put you on the spot,
No,
but you're here and we would
I
benefit
appreciate
from
it.
your,
Yeah, no,
your
thank
thoughts.
you for that, and thank you for the opportunity to come and address the committee. And I want to thank the CAO and the Fuse Fellow for all of the work that's gone into this last year. A tremendous amount of effort and energy and thoughtfulness into these recommendations. And I would say from the moment I got here 3.5 years ago, I have talked about project delivery from the very beginning. It's in our strategic plan that ended in 2017. It's in our new strategic plan that we just released. In fact, the very first day that I came to work here, the very first meeting that I walked into was a big room full of, to Councilwoman Martinez's point, mostly men. And Gary Lee Moore and I were sitting at the front, co-chairing the meeting to talk about construction coordination and project delivery issues. And our recommendations resulted in a joint budget ask that went forward and failed for subsequent budgets. So I would say that, your implementing agencies have given a lot of thought to project delivery, care about delivering world-class projects in this city, and think a lot about substantive changes that we think would make a difference. And I think that there's value in having a more robust discussion about what some of those might be. We might end up with this recommendation as the one that really we think will make us shine and will make us fly. But in terms of what it substantively does, I think there's some clarity that still needs to be teased out. It doesn't necessarily change what we legislate. You heard Commissioner James point out that we already come to the Public Works Commission on a regular basis. There already is oversight of our contracts, of the money we spend, right? And it doesn't change any of those things. You heard repeatedly that it doesn't change the chains of command. It doesn't change the leadership. It doesn't change what employees do on a day-to-day basis. If we want to change project delivery, we should be talking about those things. And those are the things that may or may not result in us moving to report up and be a Bureau of Public Works. I think we're open to that discussion. We want to have that conversation, but I don't think we want to shy away from other things that might make a real substantive difference. So that's sort of where we are. I appreciate, Councilman, your repeated reassurances to staff at the Department of Transportation, and appreciate the reports, underlining that this is not about job elimination or those kinds of things, but it is a large change. And in order to sort of guide a department through a change, there needs to be a really thoughtful and sort of compelling reason to do that. And I think that bears a larger discussion. When you move a 2,000-person department with a budget of $500 million, it needs a real conversation about the crosswalks, if you'll forgive the pun, among all of the departments, because I think that we have a very strong relationship with the Public Works bureaus, with the general managers of those bureaus. And you can look at the way that the sidewalk discussion is occurring, or the integrated design discussion is occurring, or the 2400 discussion is occurring. We're all committed to and care about project delivery. We just want to have sort of a longer discussion about it before we decide what the right steps are, and is there low-hanging fruit that we think would make a big difference that we can do right now without waiting for that longer discussion to go forward.
Mr. Rudy, do you have something you wanted to add to that? Thank you very much, Ms. Reynolds.
I was just going to say, what General Manager Salito what Salito was talking about is same thing what Councilman Martinez was talking about. I mean, governance is something that we could look into, but I'm not necessarily opposed to that in having these changes or merges, but it's more important. I want to see results, and it's about those actual definitive programs and projects that have been in the books for years, that the various departments have been asking for interfacing with each other. I mean, $318,000 for Office of Infrastructure or Construction Management, which includes and expands and goes beyond not just DOT, but public planning department and building and safety and other relevant departments that all touch basically our street or these infrastructure issues. So, and also IT and communications, right? The fact that I mean, I remember I was talking to some architects who says that the city of LA is one of the few cities, I mean, I know we're in public works here, but is one of the only few cities that are still on this old CAD system where we're not even up to date on our technology for them to accept our plans, their plans, architectural plans. So, I mean, it's about updating our systems. It's about updating our languages. It's about our different departments being able to communicate with each other instead of having to send a piece of paper. So, I mean, it's all these things that need to be done first, and then if it's still deficient, then we should look at more global, whether it's not just governance, but consolidating them completely.
I mean, Mike, it's a little bit of a chicken and egg kind of thing, too. It's that, yes, we want to have, at the end of the day, what really matters is the meat of it. What we're talking about is the programmatic changes. But whether or not it's easier to facilitate those under, this oversight structure or that oversight structure, it's not the meat of it, but we have to decide whether or not I don't know that we have to do everything before we make that choice. Personally, we could make that choice or not make that choice, even though the meat of it is still what we need to focus on, which is how that process works. The infrastructure piece of it is exciting to me. And by the way, I want to just ask, because as a cost measure, it doesn't necessarily have to be all general fund either. In fact, I would imagine a fair chunk of the funding for this would be a little bit of every other special fund. Is that true? Or can you shed any light on that?
That could be one alternative.
Yes, as we look at implementing that, we would look at what the scope of work was relative to our ability to use the variety of special funds available to the city in an appropriate level mix. I mean, we would obviously do that. We do that with everything.
But maybe as we bring this back, because we're not going to vote on this Tier 1 today, but as we bring this back, that can be another piece of it to bring back, which is potential funding structures. For my money, I always try to lean toward the structures that minimize the general fund. I think we probably all share that desire.
And I would also say that when I was proposing or designing the recommendations around this particular office, that it was always envisioned that the cost of the office would be offset by the savings they generate, by the efficiencies they find. So people cutting to the streets would be diminished, less liabilities, whatever that metric might be. But I expect it to be cost neutral, but not cost savings.
Cost savings overall, but this is always the issue of alignment, is that you have cost savings over here, but the cost to run it is over here. It's still a good decision from a city perspective, but we still have to find the money over here to run the department. That's where the diversity of funds and the special funds would make the biggest difference. And I know I'm losing members shortly, so I want to move forward with this, meaning what I'd like to do, technically we're going to continue the item and we're going to go into greater discussion on the meat of it, which is Tier 2 and Tier 3 at the next hearing, as well as requested, we'd like a report back from CLA on Tier 1. And you want to include the motion that Mr. Rue has as part of that report back and how that could be integrated into Tier 1. And that'll be part of the discussion next week. Is there anything else as far as the recommendations, colleagues, for next week? This is an open item. This is really a discussion. I mean, and I think we've made a lot of good progress as we're talking about this, what our goals and objectives can be, and maybe in this next hearing we can winnow that down to a couple of key recommendations that we'll feel good as a group about moving forward. So with that, we really appreciate the presentation, and we look forward to continuing the discussion on Tier 1, but really delving into Tier 2 and 3 at our next hearing. And with that, is there any other items on the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
No? So that then concludes this meeting. Thank you all very much.